Communication is changing, and the big difference is time. Today, the internet is the biggest communication machine in the world. To find what we want, we need to open several windows, but we don't have the time to read it all. So we have to become selective. In this universe, the most powerful way to communicate is through video. Nowadays, the video already represents 53% of the internet traffic. Until 2015, it will rise to 93%. This means that it is easier to find 50 people watching a video in the street than it is to find an elephant in a room. Promoting a product through video raises the chances to be bought by 85%. And it is not a big surprise that in 2011, on YouTube alone, were watched 1 trillion videos. 1 trillion videos. Well, if in 1 million steps you can go from the north to the south of Portugal, in 1 trillion steps you can go from the Earth to Jupiter. An average time in a text-based website is 42 seconds, and Insight with video is 5 minutes and 50 seconds. And it is easy to understand why. When browsing the internet, we prefer to click play than to read a big text. Let's see. During these 2 minutes, in the whole world, 1,200 sites have been launched and other millions of contents on this internet. And what about your message? How will you make it go through? In the middle of such a confusion, your message needs to become alive. And this is what we do. We bring life to your message. By the way, if this was a text, would you still be reading?
Competition with social networking giant Facebook. After the failed experiments of Wave and Buzz, Google seems to have finally found a way to break into the social networking scene. Meanwhile, Facebook is still trying to expand beyond a site for virtual farmers by pushing into other services such as messaging and video. So who is winning the battle for internet dominance? A Computer World analysis gives us a clue. In terms of global users, Google has the clear edge, having reached 1 billion in May, compared with 713.6 million for Facebook. For US users, however, the difference is much more narrow, and the year-over-year trend clearly favors Facebook. Moreover, US users spend much more time on Facebook than they do on Google. On the other hand, customer satisfaction among users in the US is higher for Google, with Facebook scoring near the averages for airlines and cable companies, two industries notorious for poor customer satisfaction. From an ad revenue perspective, Google is estimated to have a sizable market share advantage over Facebook, though Facebook's market share is catching up faster each year. And in terms of employees, Facebook was reportedly still trailing Google considerably in early 2010, though the Facebook headcount has almost doubled since then, suggesting that it's catching up quickly in this area as well. While Facebook might be dwarfed by Google overall, it's hardly the underdog in the social networking space. The site has over 500 million active users worldwide, while Google Plus just reported reaching the 20 million user mark. What Google Plus lacks in a head start, it's made up for in speed, reaching the 10 million and 20 million user mark in a much shorter time than Facebook. Of course, this rapid adoption rate is probably explained in part by the integration of Google Plus with the larger Google platform, including Gmail, which boasts 193 million users. In fact, a recent report found that 56% of the Google Plus upstream traffic was coming from Google properties. In May, the company admitted to hiring a PR firm to get anti-Google stories placed in major U.S. media publications, including USA Today, The Washington Post, Politico, and The Huffington Post. At the end of the day, though, this fight will be decided outside the ring by the site users. Who do you think will win this epic matchup? The US and China are the two largest single-country economies in the world, so it's little surprise that the American internet giants have Chinese equivalents. How do they stack up against each other? Google's equivalent in China, Baidu, looks quite similar in terms of site design and revenue model, but when it comes to market share, there's really no comparison. The closest thing China probably has to Facebook is RenRen, but a snapshot in May showed that RenRen had much fewer registered users as a percent of total internet users in the country. These examples contrast sharply with the success of China's Twitter counterpart, Weibo, which has both more registered accounts and active users than Twitter. Yet China's biggest internet success, Tencent, is a site that has no US peer. Hosting a variety of web services ranging from instant messaging to multiplayer online games, Tencent is the third largest internet business in the world, behind Google and Amazon. As China moves toward becoming the world's largest economy, do you think it'll begin to compete with the US as the global leader in internet innovation? Tweet us what you think at What's Trending.
If you've ever uploaded a video on YouTube, then you surely know how difficult it is to have it become popular, much less go viral. Let's just cut right into it though. You want to make your YouTube videos popular and, thus, make money from them. The absolute fastest way to get your YouTube video to go viral is to buy YouTube views. This will naturally increase its popularity and garner you even more views, and ultimately end up making you the money you made the video for in the first place. More subscribers, more comments, more visibility. All of this can be accomplished with buying YouTube views, and all of this comes naturally when buying our YouTube views. We get you the most views and visibility for your buck, and we've done it for longer than many people even knew YouTube was in existence. Hands down, we're the best in the business. So what exactly are you waiting for?
Charisma. Most of us know the word, but if I ask you to define the word, that is probably harder to do. Because what really is charisma? Let's get the dictionary out for that. The dictionary describes charisma as a special power that some people have naturally that makes them able to influence other people and attract their attention and admiration. But when exactly are you charismatic? Charisma is not only for people who are famous, outgoing, or exceptionally beautiful. Being nice or good isn't a requirement either. Adolf Hitler, for instance, was seen as a charismatic person, but he definitely wasn't a sweetheart. When exactly is someone charismatic? Characteristics of charismatic people are that they radiate self-confidence, enjoy being in the spotlight, are fluent with words, captivate their audience with humor, good advice, or an inspiring story. Examples of charismatic people are Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Oprah Winfrey, George Clooney, and Steve Jobs. But does charisma come to you naturally, or can you learn it as well? Charisma is not inborn. Everyone can develop it. Some people have a bigger talent to develop it than others. Steve Jobs, for instance, was known for his self-confidence, charm, and presence on stage. But during his first performances, he looked very shy and awkward.
Scientists have discovered that the angle between two consecutive leaves on a plant stem is always 137.5 degrees. Is it just that plants chose a favorite angle, or is there any scientific reason that could explain this choice? For you should not underestimate the smartness of a young plant. The answer to this question reveals a seamless integration between mathematics, botany, and biology. The study of arrangement of leaves on a plant stem is called as phyllotaxis. In order to survive, plants need sunlight and rain that comes directly from the sky above. But if the next leaf grows right above the previous one, it would obstruct all the sunlight for the now disappointed lower leaf. The plant cannot adopt a 180-degree cycle because now the third leaf would be blocking the sunlight for the first one. In fact, any rational fraction of the circle would mess things up sooner or later. The plant needs to choose an irrational number. And even more so, an irrational number that cannot be easily approximated by a rational number. And the award for the most difficult to reach irrational number goes to, as you probably know, the golden ratio. Done with leaves, now on to flowers. These tiny florets on the head of a sunflower arrange themselves in beautiful spirals. But why this arrangement, you ask? If every next floret were to grow at a 180-degree angle with respect to the previous one, it would result in a long line. That would be terrible, as all the space would be wasted. A 90-degree angle would be better, but still not the best. Any fraction of the circle would give us these lines, which would be good but not great. The flower needs to bend the lines. The flower needs to choose the toughest irrational number. The flower needs the golden ratio. To add more, the number of these spirals is always, in either ways, a Fibonacci number. This is because the number of spirals that the eye sees cannot be irrational. It has to be a natural number. So, in a manner similar to which we see 6 arms if the ratio would be 1/6 of a circle, we see a Fibonacci number when the ratio is close to the golden ratio. Plants have adopted the golden ratio by natural selection in their millions of years of existence. It offers them the highest packing efficiency and ensures that maximum sunlight is what they get. Besides sunflowers and leaves, Fibonacci numbers also show up in the spirals of the pineapple, the pine cone, and even the cauliflower. And who knows what yet lies to be discovered. Hey, this video will make much more sense if you have watched the previous video on the golden ratio. In that video, we intuitively prove how the golden ratio is sort of the most difficult to approximate by a rational number. If you have already watched the video, at the end of the video I gave a musical challenge for you to figure out. If you have attempted that challenge, I have given a link in the description to a PDF. It is a self-explanatory infographic and that will reveal the secret of Fibonacci numbers in our music. And while we have some more mathematical content in store for you, the next video will be on education. No spoilers here.
It's confession time. I've been looking rather obsessively over the sites of seasoned bloggers with a view to working out the answer to this question. What is the perfect distribution cycle for law firms when publishing their evergreen blog content? Or to put it another way, what's the best way of shouting from the rooftops about one's content? And here's a two-part answer. On initial publication, start with a major pulse lasting 2 or 3 days, pushing out on Twitter, for example, say every 3 or 4 hours, and then shift to a steady distribution of about 4 to 6 shares per month. Part 2, repurpose the content after 4 to 6 months and republish, starting the cycle over, and rinse and repeat as long as the content remains evergreen. Repurposing the content might mean republishing with a detailed infographic which provides a good deal more detailed content on the subject. Or an alternative could be to produce a video on the topic, looking at it from a different angle. Repurposing the content has a number of benefits. First, it polishes the user-friendliness of the content with each passing cycle. Second, it keeps the content up to date. And third, I think very importantly, it grows your social proof. Finally, what can save a lot of effort is to set the distribution cycle running automatically via an application such as Hootsuite or SocialOomph. This allows us to focus on engaging with the responses to the content. If you found this blog post useful, please do share it on.
How to fund a startup. The key to wooing venture capitalists, other than having a great idea in a promising industry, is to ask for money at the right time in a VC's life cycle. Here are the funding phases for a startup and how they correlate with a VC's life cycle. Phase 1. Seed funding. Seed funding usually comes from you, the entrepreneur's bank account, angel investors, potentially mom and dad, or crowdfunding. Seed money allows you to solidify a talented team and a business plan which is required when it comes time to talk to VCs. Right now, a company called Neptune is raising seed money through Kickstarter with plans to beat Apple to making a smartphone the size of a watch. Phase 2. Round 1 of funding. VCs start when a group of people agree to put money in a pot and not see returns for 10 years. If the VC is worth $100 million, then in round 1 they will invest about 1/3 of the fund in a variety of companies. As an entrepreneur, this is when you want your business idea to be noticed and funded. SquareTrade Inc., a startup offering warranties for your tech gadgets, recently disclosed receiving $238 million in round 1 from 11 different funds. Phase 3. Round 2 of funding. Provided your business is doing well, you may receive a second round of funding after 3 years. At this point in the VC's life cycle, the firm will look at their investments, weed out the ones that went belly up, and invest more in companies doing well. Photobucket recently went in for an additional, and they claim last, round of funding from VCs for somewhere between $5 and $10 million. Phase 4. Expansion. Now your startup is 3 to 5 years old and hopefully close to turning a profit on its own. At this time, funding will come from subordinated debt or preferred equity. This is the expansion phase. Twitter appears to be in Phase 4. After receiving $15 million in 2008, it's waiting to IPO until it can earn steady profits for an entire year. This growth money doesn't come from VCs. but helps startups push past the funded phase into the next level, which is Phase 5, IPO or sale. By now, your startup is 5 to 10 years old. You've either made it or folded. Now the venture capitalists are ready for their payday when you sell or go public. Most VC firms enjoy a 700% return on their investment in companies which go public. However, many of their investments won't make it to Phase 5. To watch more videos from the Minute MBA series, check out onlinemba.com.
Why is an enterprise social media platform for your organization important for your business? Take a look at Mark. Mark works as a production engineer at a large company in the UK. He has come up with an idea for a solution to address a problem that affects business productivity. Mark uses Atini to share his idea with his colleagues. Atini is an internal social media platform that includes the very best innovations seen on any social computing site catering for consumers. He gets a lot of positive reactions. His co-workers not only think it's a great idea, but also give him suggestions and suggest several resources. This will help him to develop the idea into a full solution. He decides to look for more knowledge within the organization. Mark searches the keywords water NMP in the internet search engine. He scans the search results for relevant information. He finds posts, articles and documents. And what's more, he finds people with expertise by what they have contributed via several channels, including articles, microblog posts, documents and tags. Mark chooses to get in touch with John, who has experience with water level regulators. John is inspired and would love to team up with Mark. Together, they write a blog post about the concept, which they share on the intranet. In a short period of time, their blog receives a lot of comments from every department in the company, feedback, information, offers of help. The manager has already been involved from the start and now decides to allocate budget for a project. Mark starts a new group on the internet to share information, planning and progress. The group uses various channels, including blog posts and videos. Microblogging proves to be an excellent channel for sharing progress with the company, for example with links to videos. With the support that Mark received via the Atini platform, he realized his idea in no time thanks to his motivated team. With Atini software, employees can now connect with each other, update their colleagues, share knowledge and experiences, learn efficiently and collaborate, while management can gain valuable insights into the organization and its people. Atini is a social suite for SharePoint that is ready to install, easy to use and works on PCs, mobile and tablets. Interested in hearing more? Please feel free to contact one of our guys.
Minute MBA. Why outsourcing is bad for business. More companies are hanging this bright yellow tag on outsourcing and offshoring. They seemed like good ideas at the time. According to The Economist, this trend, which began in the 1980s, may finally be winding down. The main reason is that the savings once realized by outsourcing, hiring domestic or foreign contractors, and offshoring, moving work overseas, aren't what they used to be. China and India were once prime targets for US, European, and multinational corporations looking to save a buck. Both were valued for their low-cost pools of highly skilled workers. The skilled workers are still there, but so is intense competition for their services. And as these workers begin to realize their value, they've also become more demanding. The Economist noted, wages in India and China have been going up by 10 to 20% a year for the past decade, and compensation for senior Chinese managers now either matches or exceeds pay in America and Europe. Rising salaries plus the cost of transporting goods to the US market have pushed some companies to reshore some of their production in America. That includes GE, which last year moved the production of washing machines and other appliances from China to a plant in Kentucky. Besides higher overseas costs, other factors bolster the argument that the grass isn't always greener in India, China, or Malaysia. A case in point is Apple's relationship with China-based Foxconn. Foxconn's enormous capacity to mass-produce the iPhone and other Apple products was an advantage. But a series of widely publicized reports, most of which focused on Foxconn's abysmal treatment of its workers, outraged many Americans, embarrassed Apple officials, and damaged the company's brand. Chief Executive Tim Cook ordered an investigation. In December, Cook announced that Apple would move the production of some Mac computers from China to America. Although Cook declared that the main goal was to create American jobs, it can also be seen as a gesture to placate critics of the Apple-Foxconn relationship. Then there's Boeing, the poster company for outsourcing gone bad. The aerospace giant's saga of flawed batteries has grounded its 787 Dreamliner fleet until a fix can be found. According to the Seattle Times, the likely culprit is the hands-off structure of this round of outsourcing, where the company contracted with about 50 top-tier suppliers and essentially outsourced responsibility. Boeing is no stranger to outsourcing. On earlier jets, the company outsourced work on landing gear, batteries, and engines for the 777 and 737. Both planes are renowned for their reliability. But according to the Times, the company gave too much autonomy to their major suppliers and surrendered oversight of subcontractors to the contractors themselves. The result is that there were too many players working on too many pieces with no centralized system of quality control. Quality and Boeing's reputation inevitably suffered. Finally, there's the story of Samsung. For US companies, the rise of the South Korean electronics giant should be a cautionary tale. According to The Economist, South Korean business leaders rarely outsource production and believe that American and European companies are making a mistake in outsourcing as much manufacturing as they do, because this allows other firms a great deal of insight into their processes. They should know. It's the blueprint Samsung followed when it was an outsourcing partner for Japanese firms. The loss of intellectual property that ends up strengthening competition. It's an irony, and one more factor for American corporations to consider when deciding whether it's time to bring foreign production home. For more videos from Minute MBA, check out onlinemba.com.
How to fund a startup. The key to wooing venture capitalists, other than having a great idea in a promising industry, is to ask for money at the right time in a VC's life cycle. Here are the funding phases for a startup and how they correlate with a VC's life cycle. Phase 1. Seed funding. Seed funding usually comes from you, the entrepreneur's bank account, angel investors, potentially mom and dad, or crowdfunding. Seed money allows you to solidify a talented team and a business plan, which is required when it comes time to talk to VCs. Right now, a company called Neptune is raising seed money through Kickstarter with plans to beat Apple to making a smartphone the size of a watch. Phase 2. Round 1 of funding. VCs start when a group of people agree to put money in a pot and not see returns for 10 years. If the VC is worth $100 million, then in round 1, they will invest about 1/3 of the fund in a variety of companies. As an entrepreneur, this is when you want your business idea to be noticed and funded. SquareTrade Inc., a startup offering warranties for your tech gadgets, recently disclosed receiving $238 million in round 1 from 11 different funds. Phase 3. Round 2 of funding. Provided your business is doing well, you may receive a second round of funding after 3 years. At this point in the VC's life cycle, the firm will look at their investments, weed out the ones that went belly up, and invest more in companies doing well. Photobucket recently went in for an additional, and they claim last, round of funding from VCs for somewhere between $5 and $10 million. Phase 4. Expansion. Now your startup is 3 to 5 years old and hopefully close to turning a profit on its own. At this time, funding will come from subordinated debt or preferred equity. This is the expansion phase. Twitter appears to be in Phase 4. After receiving $15 million in 2008, it's waiting to IPO until it can earn steady profits for an entire year. This growth money doesn't come from VCs, but helps startups push past the funded phase into the next level, which is Phase 5, IPO or sale. By now, your startup is 5 to 10 years old. You've either made it or folded. Now the venture capitalists are ready for their payday when you sell or go public. Most VC firms enjoy a 700% return on their investment in companies which go public. However, many of their investments won't make it to Phase 5. To watch more videos from the Minute MBA series, check out onlinemba.com. Minute MBA. 3 ways to reform the patent system. Today, patents are sold in bulk to lawyers who, instead of capitalizing on the invention, make their money by suing anyone and everyone they can claim is infringing on their patent. Here are 3 ways to fix the patent problem that's plaguing the investors of America. Get rid of it. That's right, abolish the patent system. An idea recently published by 2 economists at the St. Louis Reserve. They argue the current patent system doesn't appear to improve productivity or innovation. All it does is lead to lawsuits and waste time and money. If patents simply disappeared, so would our current problem. Tighten the scope of what's an invention. Last year, Apple took Samsung to court, claiming Samsung ripped off the iPhone. Samsung lost and was ordered to pay Apple $1 billion, a number that's quickly being amended. One of the patents that Samsung supposedly breached? Apple's notorious patent on the shape of their iPhone, a rectangle. By requiring patents to be truly innovative and highly specific, fewer people will be granted patents, and innovation and competition from other companies can happen without a lawsuit waiting around every corner. Recruit more judges and specialists. Patents are meant to be never thought of ideas. But oftentimes, less than clever things get through the cracks because judges and patent officers don't specialize in all the industries that inventors do. The way to solve this is by hiring experts and spreading patent cases to different judges. For example, if a software specialist were assigned approving software patents, it would be less likely that ideas obvious to anyone in the industry would be granted a patent. To watch more videos from the Minute MBA series, check out onlinemba.com. Minute MBA: 3 reasons why government shouldn't be run like a business. With Reaganism of the 1980s came the idealistic political stance that governments should be run like a business, with the president as both CEO and commander-in-chief, and Americans as shareholders and customers. Here are 3 reasons why the government shouldn't be run like a business. 1. Profit versus people. A corporation's mission is to make profits. This isn't just good business sense, it's also a legally binding component of incorporating. Government's mission is to provide for all citizens through the common good, things like roads, schools, and police protection. In fact, if a government is profiting, then they are probably hoarding tax dollars for no good reason. Microsoft may be smart for keeping $36.1 billion in cash and liquid short-term investments, but the government would be letting people down if they sat on that much money and weren't using it to keep the country running. 2. Shareholders versus citizens. There are 535 people in Congress, the president, and 9 judges. All of these politicians and judges answer to over 300 million Americans. That's a lot of decision makers, but it's this system of checks and balances that works to ensure each person's voice is heard. It isn't perfect. Lobbyists, special interests, and corruption still exist, but consider the alternative. As a minor shareholder in a major company, you wouldn't even have the opportunity to vote on major business decisions, like whether or not to remove a failing CEO. 3. Customers versus constituents. Companies have the luxury of dumping a line of business because it isn't profitable, or choose to streamline their offerings to serve just one sector of the population. Government agencies do not have this option. This is a good thing. Imagine if Apple ran the government. Fire and police departments would only answer calls to the homes of 20-something hipsters, we'd all have to use iTunes to file our taxes, and all legal disputes would be resolved at the Genius Bar. It would be horrible. For more videos from Minute MBA, check out onlinemba.com/videos.
Hi, Nick Nichols here, publisher of Digital Marketing Tools iPad magazine, and this is your Digital Marketing Minute. This is a series that we're calling Becoming a Person of Interest. I received quite a bit of email that asked, how do I find all of these articles that I put in my social media channels, my Facebooks, my Twitters, my Google Pluses, my LinkedIn profile? Well, this is all part of a process that we call fueling up. Now, what is fueling up? Fueling up is a process of both staying current in your market niche and at the same time publishing content that will establish you with credibility in your market. We all want to keep up with our niche or passion, but it's difficult, whether it be SEO and social media as I do for Digital Marketing Tools magazine, or perhaps a real estate agent keeping up with her profession and the local marketing effort. The same could be true of a bicycle shop, a teacher, a student, wanting to keep up with the subjects that interest them. The problem, it seems, that it would take a lot of time to find all of this content. Well, the fact is, I don't find all these articles. They find me. You see, I use a custom service that updates all of my articles with the current information on digital marketing tools that I need. I share this knowledge across all my social channels. This confirms my expertise to my current audience, and then as they share my content, it grows my followers. See, I build this custom news service, and you can too. I use an easy online free tool called Feedly.com, Feedly.com. It's simple. Here's how I use Feedly.com. In the normal course of my internet browsing, I may come across a blog post or article that I really like, and this is where Feedly comes in. All I do is I merely copy the address, the web address for that article. I go to feedly.com. I go to add content, paste that article in there, press go. It finds all of the articles, the feeds that author has published. I press what I like. I look it over. I press follow because I really like what they're writing here. I place it in one of the categories that I've already established. I'm going to put this in internet marketing, but you can also create new categories as you like and as you build your newspaper, so to speak. I'm going to put this in internet marketing, press add, and that's it. Now, pole position marketing, the one I just found, is in my news feed, and that it'll go along in internet marketing with the rest of the ones I have in internet marketing, and all of these subject lines, the categories that I placed in my Feedly account, just like a newspaper with headlines. That's it. I've added it, and now I have all the articles that I know that interest me and I believe will interest my audience, which increases my credibility and grows my followers. That's all for today. That's your Digital Marketing Minute. I hope that it helped you in your marketing efforts. And as always, let me know if I can ever help in any way. This has been Nick Nichols with Digital Marketing Tools Magazine and your Digital Marketing Minute.
The US Congress and presidential elections. Voting. The people's chance to decide who they want to run their country and represent their interests. But how does it work in the United States of America? Across the pond, voting is quite different. Like the UK Parliament, the United States Congress has two houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate. Unlike the UK, there are public elections for both houses, and a third separate election is held to choose a president. In the US, the president is both the head of state and the head of government. In the UK, these roles are carried out separately by the monarch and the Prime Minister. The House of Representatives in the US Congress is designed to give a voice to the people of every local voting region of America. Members of the House of Representatives stand for re-election every 2 years. Each state is split into districts, and each district votes for one representative. The number of districts depends on the population of each state. For example, California, the most populous state, is split into 53 districts, so has 53 representatives. But Alaska, which is huge but has a really small population, only has one district and therefore only one representative in the House. Like the UK House of Commons, the election system is first past the post, so the candidate with the most votes in each district wins a seat in the House of Representatives. The party that wins a majority of seats in the House takes control. The ideal situation for a president is that the House is controlled by their own party. However, with elections held every 2 years, there's always a midterm election in the middle of a president's time in office. If the public thinks that the president's not doing a great job, they can vote in more members of the opposition party, making it more difficult for the president to pass laws. The Senate in the US Congress, like the House of Lords in the UK Parliament, is sometimes called the upper house. George Washington described the Senate as the saucer that cools the coffee, meaning that it's their job to scrutinise and question all proposals made by both the House of Representatives and the President, before voting to decide whether they should proceed as law. Senators, like members of the House of Representatives, are also elected to their seats by the public. Senators serve 6-year terms, and elections are staggered, so every 2 years, a third of the senators run for re-election. Each state is represented by 2 senators, regardless of its population. And again, the first past the post voting system is used, so the candidate with the most votes wins. So how do Americans choose their leader? Well, presidential elections take place every 4 years. The 2 main parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, host big get-togethers where they choose their presidential candidate, the person they think will be the best leader for the nation. The winning candidate then chooses their vice presidential candidate, also known as their running mate, to help support the campaign. Presidential candidates usually choose someone with different areas of skill or knowledge, so they present voters with the best package. Together, they're known as a ticket. Presidential candidates from both parties then start out on massive election campaigns to gain as much voter support as possible. They travel across the country and hold great big campaign rallies where they set out their policies and their ideas for the whole country. These campaigns cost money, lots of it. So both candidates have large campaign teams who help raise the tens of millions of dollars needed to keep them afloat. When it comes to election day, the public go to the polls to vote for one presidential ticket. So far, so easy. However, the public don't vote directly for their choice of president. Instead, a system called the Electoral College is used. Each state is allocated a number of electors that will make the final choice. A state has the same number of electors as it does senators and representatives. In most states, all the electors will vote for the presidential ticket which received the most support in the public vote. Finally, the presidential ticket with the most Electoral College votes becomes President and Vice President of the United States of America.
So that's how things work in the US. A democracy like the UK, but on a much larger scale.
Investment property is different from the property, plant and equipment because the changes in value for the investment property, we're going to take that into the income statement. But for the PPE, the changes in value, we can only take that into the OCI. In order to recognise the investment property, this property has to have investment purpose. For example, you hold this property in order to enjoy the capital gains. So for example, buy at $1, but you expect that is to be $1 million to enjoy the capital gain, or the rental income to lease it to another party to get the income. And also the property has to be completed. If not, of course, we need to account for that under the IAS number 11 construction contract. And the subsequent measurement for that is that the value would be $10, but now would be $15. So $5 of gain value, we're going to take that into the statement profit loss, where we're going to debit the investment property of 5 and credit the income statement of 5. IAS number 8, the key facts for that is that firstly, what are the accounting policies? Accounting policy is something to do with your measurement, recognition, presentation. So for example, if I'm going to measure my inventory using the FIFO rather than weighted average cost, that would be the accounting policy. If I'm going to recognise that particular expense as an asset rather than an expense, that would be accounting policy. If I'm going to present my depreciation into the admin expenses rather than the cost of sales, that would be the accounting policy. Accounting estimate is something to do with your experience. So for example, doubtful debt, useful life of the asset depreciation method, or maybe you're going to estimate how much goods you're going to return to the customer and fix for them. That will be your accounting estimate. If there's a change in accounting policies or errors is being found in the last year's account, what you're going to do is that you're going to deem the last year's account, you're going to review that last year's account to be comparable with this year, which means the retrospective adjusting method, looking backwards. If a change in the accounting estimate, you're looking forward, which means you're going to adjust for the figure based upon your current value. The key facts about the financial instrument is that two parties sign the contract and one party will get the benefit from another party. So in this case, another party has to pay for this party interests. As a result of that, this party will have the liability to pay for them interest, so that it would be the financial liability to them and it would be the financial asset, because using this contract, I can receive the interest income from you. Also, if I'm going to hold this contract, I can receive the dividend from you, and that would call the investment in equity instruments in one party and financial liability in another. So the initial measurement for those is that we're going to take the price of the financial instrument minus the discount minus the issue cost. In this case, recognize $2 here. But for subsequent measurements, we can measure it using the amortized costs, take the fair value to changes to the income statement, or take the fair value changes to the OCI. It's up to you, but it will depend upon different tests to different categories. The key factor about the non-current asset held for sale is that the non-current asset is used by the business. It's more than one accounting period, but now you want to sell it, so that you're going to reclassify that non-current asset into non-current asset held for sale under the current asset. You need to fulfill, you are going to sell it, yeah, the criteria, you're going to sell it, it's available for sale, you're locating a buyer actively, you're posting the advertisement, that kind of thing, and the sale will be expected to be completed within 1 year after the date of at the year end. From that perspective, once you've been reclassified into non-current asset held for sale, you're not going to charge any depreciation anymore. And for some of the companies, they would like to do that is because they want to window adjust their financial statements. Because you can see here, the current ratio will be boosted if you are going to reclassify the non-current asset into the current asset over here. And for discontinued operation, what do I mean by discontinue is that you're going to plan to close or you have closed the major line of the business or the subsidiary. Okay, you acquire the subsidiary in order to resell it to someone else. As a result of that, you need to disclose this discontinued operations result. So, for example, into the SFP, separate assets and liabilities of that. Also, within the statement of profit and loss, you need to show the single line of post-tax profit and loss with regards to this discontinued operation. If you want to capitalize the intangible asset, it needs to be identifiable, which means you've got the contract, you've purchased it. So that for the internally generated intangible assets such as the slogan or the company name, etc., etc., so that has to be ignored because that is not identifiable because you haven't got a contract of that. And also, the expense can be reliably measured. For example, you spend $10 to buy this brand, so for example, and also it meets the asset definition. So for example, you can use up this asset to generate into economic benefit, future economic benefit. As a result of that, fulfilling these three criteria, you can debit the asset and credit the cash paid. And for the internally generated intangible asset, that will be the research expenses as well. Research expense, you need to expense that to the income statement. But for the development costs, only fulfilling certain criteria, you can capitalize that as an asset. So for the subsequent measurement for the intangible asset, because you're using it to generate benefit, as a result of that, how to reflect that you have used it, as a result of that, of course, we're going to charge the amortization expense and create the asset value down. And that will be the same logic behind the IAS number 16, depreciation. So, in order to help the users of the financial statements to identify the business activities within a company, we've got the reportable operating segment. But before that, what is the operating segment is that it should have business activities. So for example, within a group, we've got subsidiary B, C and D specializing in education, mining and financial services industry. Of course, those will have the business activities and those results will be reviewed by the CEO to make economic decisions, and also BCD will have separate statement of financial position, statement of profit loss, etc. And from that perspective, it is the operating segment. But is it a reportable operating segment? Well, it will depend upon whether or not that particular subsidiaries the profit or assets or revenue will exceed the 10% of the total one. If this is the case, we need to disclose those results separately, and that will be the operating segment. Okay, so let's finish off the IFRS number 8. The key facts about the IAS number 12 is that it can be split into current tax or deferred tax. Current tax is the tax expenses you estimate the company to pay, okay, in the next year. So for example, you estimate to be $10, but not until next year you know the exact amount of taxes you're going to pay for. So that in next year you know that you have to pay for 15. As a result of that, you need to provide for another $5 of taxes you pay for the tax authority. Deferred tax is what I refer to as the future tax consequences taken into account into today's terms. For example, if you're going to revalue an asset of $5, you pay for another, corporation tax rate is 30%, which means at some point in the future when you dispose of this asset, you can recognize this revaluation gain of $5. As a result of that, you need to pay for another $1.5 of tax expenses. Take into account into today's terms, that will be deferred tax liability. And deferred tax liability simply arises because of the temporary differences, because of the rules in the accounting and the tax authority are different. For example, so here $5 is the revaluation gain, but in next year, due to some revaluation of the assets, again, this value comes down to $4. As a result of that, you only pay for $1.2, yeah, at some point in the future if you sell off this asset. As a result of that, you recognize 1.5 originally, but now becomes 1.2, and that would be a decrease in deferred tax liability of 0.3, and this 0.3 will called the deferred tax transfer or movement. The key facts about the IAS number 11 construction contract is that when you are building a building, of course, or long-term asset, that asset has not finished. If the asset is not finished, you can't recognize it as the PPE because you can't use it to generate future economic benefit. So that the IAS number 11 says, if this is the case, you need to focus upon the revenue, expense, as well as the profit, when to recognize them, and also how much you should recognize them. So if this contract is the loss-making contract, you need to take the full losses to the income statement directly. So the losses, comprise with the revenue and expense. So the revenue will be the contract price, and the expense will be the expense you incur in order to build this asset. If you're not sure about the future profit, you are not going to recognize any of these profit or losses into the income statement, i.e. making the revenue equal to the expense. If it is a profit-making contract and you're sure about this contract is profit-making, of course you're going to recognize the profit loss based upon the stage of completion. The stage of completion identified by the IAS level 11 can be the sales basis or the cost basis. The key facts about the government grants is that when you recognize the sales revenue, so for example, if the company buys an asset, of course, debit the PPE and creates the cash payment of 100. But because of buying the assets, the government will give you a help. So give you $10 to help you out. So for example, as a result of that, what the company is going to do is to debit the cash receipt from the government and credit the deferred income. Why this is the case? It's not to credit the income statement, it's because the company hasn't used the asset yet. And from that perspective, according to the IAS number 18, for example, the revenue should be recognized if the expenses can be reliably measured. But here, because the company hasn't used up the asset, of course, no expense incurred. As a result of that, we can only recognize the revenue if there's any corresponding expenses. As a result of that, for the subsequent measurement for the asset, it needs to be depreciated, and now we're going to reverse the deferred income by debiting the deferred income into the sales revenue to match that particular sales revenue with the expense, which is the depreciation expense we incur. So that's it. The key facts about the IAS number 37 is, for example, you are suing me for the breach of contract. As a result of that, I have the obligation to pay for the expenses for you, for example, the damages, and the damage can be reliably measured at $5, and the cash outflow, I asked the lawyer says it's more than 50% of chance I have to pay for you. As a result of it, it's probable. As a result of it, I need to recognize the expense and liability of 5. Because I fulfill the POR criteria, I need to recognize the provision. But if the lawyer says it is only possible cash outflow, or the expenses cannot be reliably measured by the company of $5, as a result of that, I can only disclose that to the note. But make sure that this will be the present obligation for the company. Because you are showing me, as a result of that, to you, this will be the contingent asset if the cash inflow to you is probable. So that if this is the case, you're going to disclose that in the note of the financial statements as a contingent asset. But if the judge says to you, I have to pay for you the money, because now becomes virtually certain because the cash inflow to you is more than 95% of chance. As a result of that, you can recognize the receivable and credit the sales revenue. Is number 2, inventory. The key facts for that is the inventory is held for sale. It's less than 1 accounting period. So for example, we've got this iPad on hand. If I'm going to sell it, that will be the inventory. If I'm going to use it by the business, of course, that will be the PPE, property, plant, and equipment. And the measurement for that is that we're going to take the number of the inventory multiplied by the individual value. So for example, if you buy 1 iPad, the number of them will be 1. And the initial value of that will be the purchase price. So for example, $5 of that for that. And if I'm going to employ lots of labour to manufacturing it, of course that will be the cost to be capitalised as inventory. But subsequently, after the financial statement year end, of course, we're going to value the inventory at the lower of the cost and the NRV. The cost would be the price, the value within the SFP days. So for example, would be $4, but the NRV will be the same price to sell it off to some other party, will be $3. Of course, we're going to value at $3 for the subsequent measurement for the inventory. Is number 1, presentation of financial statements just talks about. Firstly, a complete set of financial statements will include the statement of financial position showing the assets, liabilities and equity, statement of profit, loss and other comprehensive income showing the revenue, expense and profit, statement of changes in equity and also statement of cash flow. Also, IAS number 1 says if your company can trade your business at least 12 months after the SFP date, of course you need to use the going concern basis, which means not only are you going to include the non-current assets and liabilities, but also the current one. But if you're not a going concern entity anymore, which means you will trade less than 1 accounting period, from the SFP date, of course you need to use the breakup basis. Of course, the breakup basis would mean that you're not going to include any of these non-current assets and also non-current liabilities into account. Hi, this is Steve from ACCAAPC.com. So, welcome to this ACCA Paper P7 Last Minute Advice. In this particular video, I'm going to talk to you about the question that might come up in the common sitting as the current issue question. So recently, the P7 examiner team has released an article with the proposed changes in the auditor's report. And that particular article lays out the proposed changes and also is comments about those changes in auditor's report to the users of the financial statement. So from that perspective, I do think that this particular article may come up as the current issue question in the P7 exam. So here, I'm not going to read through the whole article to you. What I'm trying to do is to summarise the points within the article in 2 pages over here. You can learn them, and then one of the questions I think will come up will be presented later on. So what this article is talking about is that the structure of the auditor's report will change. So for example, in the past or now, of course, the auditor's report, we've got the opinion paragraph and also basic opinion paragraph in the bottom of the audit report. So from that perspective, it might not be quite useful to the users of the financial statements to judge what's going on, because they have to read a lot of things before they come to the opinion paragraph or the basic opinion paragraph. So from that perspective, of course, we need to make some changes in the future. So that's what I mean by current issues. And from that perspective, what is the change will be? Well, the structure of the audited report is that the basic idea behind it is that we're going to take those actual valuable opinion and also basic opinion paragraph to the top of the report rather than in the bottom. That's it. And also in the bottom of the auditor's report, the auditor needs to add the auditor's commentary. So what this commentary actually means is that auditor will have to say what's going on with regards to the client's company. It is not saying that, well, the financial statements are true and fair, the financial statements, this area is not true and fair, but the rest of them are true and fair. Also, you have to comment on, so for example, your judgment, whether or not the company has done a good job, whether or not the company is still a going concern status company, and also you have to disclose any of these significant related party transactions in the auditor's commentary as well. So you have to say in your auditor's commentary, well, this particular transaction involving the amount, for example, $5 million is the related party transaction. And also, what are the key risky areas that you think that a client has? This will be quite useful because for the investors, they have to decide whether or not to buy or sell a share. So from that perspective then, of course, it will be quite useful to identify any of these risky areas to them, say to them this is risky before they can make a decision. So in summary, the changes in the auditor's report can improve the relevance to those users. That will be quite good, yeah? Okay, so the content within the proposed within the proposed changes in the auditor's report. Firstly, responsibility paragraph. You need to have a very clear management responsibility of the going concern status of the company. If this is not the case, if the company is not a going concern status, of course you need to prepare your financial statements under a breakup basis. We need to, clearly take that within the responsibility paragraph, rather than say to you, if you think it's a going concern, prepare the financial statements under a going concern basis. If not, under breakup basis. No. But now we're going to put that into the responsibility paragraph to make that clear to the management. And also, auditor will need to say whether or not that management's view about the going concern status of the company is appropriate. And also, we need to disclose further issues as well, whether or not you comply with the ethical standards, requirements to do the things, whether or not during the actual audit work we have involved other auditors to do the work as well. So this might lead to an issue. As you can imagine here, you're going to add a subjective auditor's commentary in the bottom of the auditor's report. You have to say something. You have to say something which might be quite subjective. So for example, you think this area is risky, but maybe other investors may not think this area is risky. And from this perspective then, especially for the listed companies, public listed companies, if you're going to add an auditor's commentary which is quite subjective, it might influence the share price of that particular company. What if your opinion is wrong? What if your judgment is wrong from an auditor's perspective? Of course, share price will decrease because investors are relying on your judgment. And from this perspective then, of course, if your share price decreases and because of your negligence, of course, maybe the company will try to sue you. And from that perspective, I do think the proposed changes in the auditor's report may be linked with another topic, which is the auditor's liability. If you're not sure what's going on for the auditor's liability, of course, go back to your study notes, go back to your textbook, or go back to our course. Okay, I've explained to you how to, reduce the auditor's liability and in what circumstances the auditor's liability will come up. Okay, so that's the key. And one of the current issue question potentially may come up in the comment setting, as far as I'm concerned, is about the comment bit about the proposed changes in the auditor's report. Maybe the examiner is not going to ask you, well, what is the content of the changes in the auditor's report, because that would be quite technical. So from that perspective, I do think the general comment bit about this will come up. When you are commenting on this particular topic, you have to be specific. You can't just say that it's good or it's bad, but rather you need to give specific examples. So let's see how we're going to do that. Advantages. Of course, I'm going to say that I'm going to improve or enhance your understanding of the audit process. Why? Because I have made a lot of comment in the auditor's commentary. I've told you how to identify the risky areas and what are the risky areas and whether or not the company is still going concern status, etc. So that by using those information, of course, it will enhance the user's understanding of the audit process. And also, it will be quite relevant to the users in particular, because they're going to use the information, rely on the information to make their economic decisions of whether to buy or sell a share. Also, it will be easier to be understood, because within the audit report, the content within the audit report, we've got a title, Independent Auditor's Report, and then addressed to the shareholders, and the introduction paragraph, responsibility paragraph, and then basic opinion, and signature, etc. So we're going to put those basic opinion paragraph onto the top of the page, rather than the bottom. So from that perspective, when obtaining this particular auditor's report, we can see directly whether or not the financial statements are true and fair by looking at the opinion paragraph. So from that perspective, it will be easier to be understood by the users, because within the within the responsibility paragraph or introduction paragraph, maybe that would be too complicated, technically complicated to those users. From that perspective, relying on looking at the opinion paragraph on top of the page, of course, easier to understand what's going on. And also, you can track lots of useful information. So, for example, whether or not the management has complied with the ethical standards, and whether or not you complied with the accounting standards to prepare your FS, what's the key areas, key risky areas, etc., etc. Okay, so those would be the advantages that you can comment on in the exam. Also, you can use other answers as well, no problem. But the disadvantage of those is that the length of the auditor's report will be increased as well. Simply because, you can think about it this way. Instead of talking about the opinion, basic opinion, signature, etc., you need to add the auditor's commentary, which is quite subjective and also quite lengthy. So from that perspective then, of course, it will increase the costs charged to the client's company as well. And also, it's quite subjective whether or not your auditor's liability will be increased as well. And from that perspective, maybe you're going to charge more, because to compensate your risk you're suffering. Also, you can use other alternative methods to limit your liability as well. You can revise them into your textbook or our course. Okay, so that finishes off the potential current issue question that may come up in the comment setting. And good luck to your P7 exam. The key facts about the revenue recognition is that you need to follow the SIRR in order to recognize the revenue. So S stands for the stage of completion. This can be used in the service industry quite a lot. So for example, if you buy the courses, you give me cash, but I haven't provided you with the service, I cannot recognize the full amount of sales revenue. But when I actually incur the expenses and then provide you with the service, and then we can recognize the corresponding revenue in relation to that. So from that perspective, the revenue should be based upon the stage of completion. Also, the expenses can be reliably measured. And also in the IAS Level 11, I said to you before, the construction contract revenue can be, recognized based upon the stage of completion. That would be the same logic. And also, if I sell the asset to you, I can't say to you, give the asset back to me today because I want to use it. I can't do that because there's there has to be no managerial involvement over this asset anymore. And also the asset risks rewards has been transferred, which means if the asset is stolen, it is your fault. And from that perspective, you can recognize the revenue. The key facts about the IAS number 16 PPA is that the property, plant and equipment is used by the business for more than 1 year. If this is not the case, if it's going to be sold by business, that will be the inventory. If it is used by business, that will be the PPA. Okay, so initial measurement by how much we should capitalize that as the PPE onto the face of SFP would be the cost you purchase this PPE and other costs in bringing the assets into the present location and condition, such as the surveyor's cost, such as the installation costs. But for the subsequent measurement for that is that the asset needs to be depreciated or maybe revalued, maybe impaired, maybe disposed of. So firstly, depreciation expenses simply means to reflect the fact that the asset has been used by the business and hence the value would goes down. Okay, so that would be the accounting expense. So for example, the asset worth $10, it can be used 10 years. Of course, depreciation will be 1, so that in the first year the asset value 10, second year will be 9, third year will be 8 because we minus 1, minus 1 and minus 1. Revalued, which means the asset actually worth $10 but now goes up to $15, so we need to do some of the accounting adjustment to that. Impairment simply means the asset value is $15 but now goes down to $10. As a result of that, we need to recognize that particular impairment expenses into the income statement. If I'm going to sell it off to the third party, for example, sell it at $15 but the asset is actually worth $10, as a result of that we can make a gain of $5 taken to that into the income statement. The key facts about the borrowing cost is just an expense. So for example, 5% expense over 100, you can either expense that to the statement profit loss or you can capitalize that. If you want to capitalize that, of course it's your choice. It is your accounting policy. You need to fulfill the certain criteria under the IAS number 23. Firstly, the asset should be a long-term asset. So for example, a factory or big ship or maybe a power generation facility. As a result of that, of course, it meets the first criteria. And secondly, that particular interest expense should be related specifically to the assets, okay? If this is not the case, of course, you need to do further adjustment. And thirdly, when it ceases to be capitalized is when the asset is finished. For example, you build the asset from 1st January 2013 and it can be finished on 1st January 2014, so that during this period you can capitalize that particular interest expense as an asset. But if you just to put the asset into use on 1st February 2014, that particular period cannot be capitalized. Cannot capitalize the expense as an asset. The key facts about the lease accounting is that, what do I mean by leases is that for the asset, if you want to acquire the asset, you can either buy it or you're going to lease it. There's two ways that you can do that. If you're going to buy it, that will be the buyer, that will be the seller, that will be the buyer. If you're going to lease it, that will be the lessor, that will be the lessee. So the leases can be the operating lease and it can be the finance lease. So what do I mean by operating lease is that the lessor would say to the lessee that if the asset is stolen, it's my fault. And from that perspective, risks and rewards hasn't been transferred. That will be the operating lease. As a result of that, how to account for it in the lessee's account, of course, you're going to expense that. The rental payment to the lessor, and for the lessor, that will be the income for them. And if the lessor say to the lessee that if the asset is stolen, it is your fault, which means the risks and rewards has been transferred. From that perspective, that will be the finance lease. How to account for the finance lease is that in the lessee's account, you need to recognize the assets because the assets has been transferred, yes, from the lessor to lessee, and need to recognise the liabilities because you haven't paid for the lessor in a full amount, and from that perspective you need to accrue that as well. But for the lessor, of course, you need to recognise the cash received from the lessee. That's it. The key facts about the forex rate changes is that if you're doing the single transaction, so for example, if you buy the asset at $10, but because of the exchange rate actually moves, but you haven't paid for the supplies yet, but now it moves up, the price moves up to $12. As a result of that, you will end up spending another $2, yeah, instead of $10. As a result of that, that would be a loss for you. You're going to recognise that particular loss into the income statement or statement of profit loss. So that's the idea behind it. The forex change can relate to the group. So when you are doing the consolidation, you're going to consolidate the subsidiaries account into a group. But that subsidiary is overseas subsidiary. So for the SFP, you're going to use the year-end rates at the year-end. Okay, so you're going to retranslate all these assets and liabilities. Also for the income statement, you're going to use the average rate. Okay, so that's it. The key facts about the related party transaction is that for the related parties, their transaction between those two parties, of course, we need to disclose it. It is simply because, for example, the asset value, the fair value actually worth $10, but because the related parties are the parties that one have control or significant influence over another, which means instead of selling this asset from A to B at $10, I can sell it at $1 million because I have control over you, so that I can sell at whatever prices I want, and you need to accept it. As a result of that, this transaction is not a genuine transaction, as you can see here, because it's abnormal, yes? So from that perspective, we need to disclose that. So disclosure requirement will include sale or purchase of the goods, the parties involved, the relationship between them, the value of the transaction, and the date of the transaction as well. If you want to capitalize the intangible asset, it needs to be identifiable, which means you've got the contract, you've purchased it. So that for the internally generated intangible assets such as the slogan or the company name, etc., so that has to be ignored because that is not identifiable because you haven't got a contract of that. And also the expense can be reliably measured. For example, you spend $10 to buy this brand, so for example, and also it meets the asset definition. So for example, you can use up this asset to generate into economic benefit, future economic benefit. As a result of that, fulfilling these three criteria, you can debit the asset and credit the cash paid. And for the internally generated intangible asset, that will be the research expenses as well. Research expense, you need to expense that to the income statement. But for the development costs, only fulfilling certain criteria, you can capitalize that as an asset. So for the subsequent measurement for the intangible asset, because you're using it to generate benefit, as a result of that, how to reflect that you have used it, as a result of that, of course, we're going to charge the amortization expense and create the asset value down. And that will be the same logic behind the IAS number 16 depreciation. The key facts about the share-based payment is that we're going to pay something by shares. We're going to pay for the employees using shares. Either we're going to give them shares, which means this is the equity sector, or we can give them cash, but that particular cash price will relate to the share price, and that will be the share appreciation right. And from that perspective then, the accounting treatment will be different. If it is equity settled, we're going to debit the expense and credit the equity. If it is cash settled, we're going to debit the expense and credit the cash paid. Haven't paid by cash, credit the liability. And that particular expense, how we're going to determine that is where we're going to take the number of total shares granted to each of the employee, multiplied by the fair value of them, and multiplied by the service period. So the number of rights is that for each of the employees, so for example 10 employees there, each of them we're going to grant 5 rights to them, so that total one is to be 50. And the fair value, how can we determine that, is that if it is equity settled, then we sign a contract with the employee, so that we're going to take that fair value at the date we sign the contract, which means the grant date. So for example, $5 for that. $5 giving you the right at $5 to buy the shares, but maybe at some point in the future the share price actually increases up to $50, so that you can enjoy the capital gain out of that. But if I'm going to use the cash settled, of course I'm going to use the fair value at each and every year end, okay? So why are we going to multiply by the timing ratio then? It's the vesting period, as we can say, is simply because, for example, if it is 50 over here and the fair value is 5, as a result of that, the total expense is to be 250. Are we going to recognise 250 right now? The answer is no, because the number of employees will change, because some of the employees would leave the company, some of the new employees will come into the company. As a result of that will be the change in the accounting estimate. As a result of that, in order to be prudent, we need to spread this cost of 250 over the period that the employee has provided the service for me, so for example 5 years. As a result of that, that's how we recognise the expense for that. And just a quick example of that is that equity settled, share-based payments, the number 50, fair value is 5, and 5 years providing a service to me. And at the end of the first year, of course 1 over 5, if we are going to multiply by them all together, that will be expense will be 50. And at the year start, because you haven't provided me with any service at all, so that we're not going to recognise any of the expense at all, because no revenue is generated at the year start. As a result of that, from year start to the year number 1, of course, increase of 50 because it's equity settled, so that we're going to credit the equity of 50 and then the expense of 50. The key factor about the employee benefit is that when you pay the salary, benefit or other termination, so that you need to recognise the expense and credit the cash paid. If you haven't paid by cash, of course credit the liability. But if you agree to pay for the employee when they retire, you need to recognise that under the pension accounting. There will be 2 pension accounting here. It will be the defined contribution plan or defined benefit plan. What do I mean by defined contribution plan is that this is the company, puts a lump sum of money each and every year to a trustee. It's up to a trustee to invest this money into somewhere else to generate a higher return. And if the trustee can make a profit out of it, of course, they're going to pay for the employees when they retire. But if the trustee has not made any money, of course, the trustee is not going to pay for the employee. As a result of that, when the company settles its payment to the trustee, the risk rewards of the asset is being passed from the company to the trustee. As a result of that, the company is going to do is to recognise the expense and credit the cash. But for the defined benefit plan, what this actually says is that the company agrees to pay for the employee $5 when they retire, so that it would be the liability for the company, and hence any money put into the trustee has not been transferred from the company to the trustee, because the company has to settle that liability. As a result of that, for the company, they have to recognise, they have to show the pension assets and its liabilities into its account. The key facts of the IAS number 10 is where we're going to have a look at what is the events after the reporting period. The events after the reporting period is the events happening between the year end and the financial statements being authorised to the shareholders. And the accountant is two responsibility is to determine either the events can be adjusted or disclosed in the notes. So adjusted event is where the event happening within this period change the assumption outside the year end. So for example, after the year end, customers go bankruptcy, and because outside the year end you provide for the allowance for doubtful debt. As a result of that, that customer goes bankruptcy. Of course, that changes the assumption, that needs to be adjusted. So for example, if the company after the event is not a going concern entity, of course, because as at the event we prepared the FS based upon the going concern assumption, and because after the event it's not a going concern, change the assumption, that will be adjusted event. Non-adjusted event, we're going to disclose that. So for example, fire happens after the event, we cannot predict that as at the event, we're not going to do something about it, but rather we're going to disclose it. Dividends declared after the event has no link for between the figures as at the event. Of course, we'll just to disclose this fact in the note.
Systems thinking, a way to maximize program effectiveness. Systems thinking. Maybe you've heard of it, are doing it, or you've heard that you should be doing it. What is it, and what does it mean for the senior manager? Let's start by looking at what a system is. A system is any kind of entity that is made up of parts that interact. Together, these parts and their interconnections create a whole, which in turn produces some kind of result. Using a systems perspective is important because it helps us to better understand what helps or hinders the success of health interventions. Here's an example. Meet Suzanne. Suzanne is a senior manager in a large regional health organization. The high rate of obesity is an issue in her community, and she's been mandated to address this problem. Her first instinct is to develop a program to get more people active. But what is realistic to expect from this approach? Systems thinkers believe that viewing a program like this, apart, in isolation of the larger system within which it operates, the whole, tends to ignore other aspects that might influence its potential for impact. Why? Research tells us that obesity is the result of a combination of many physiological, psychological, social, environmental, and economic factors that all interact with one another. For example, at the individual level, there are issues such as human physiology, exercise habits, food choices, and one's occupation. But beyond the individual, there are other factors at play such as the local built environment, quick and easy access to junk food, and larger food industry practices such as trends in portion sizes, sugar, and fat content. The interaction of all these influences make obesity the product of what we call a complex system. If Suzanne were to use a systems approach, she would realize that relying on simple linear cause and effect solutions for one program would ignore those interactions and likely fail. While Suzanne's staff at the program level have a tendency to think only within the boundaries of their program, senior managers and planners like Suzanne are in a unique position to do what systems thinkers call zooming out. Zooming out considers how other aspects outside of a program's traditional boundaries, both within the organization and beyond, might influence the success of the program. By zooming out and looking at the influence of other interventions, policies, structures, patterns, and norms in the broader system, Suzanne is better able to strategically consider other values and perspectives and the interrelationships among each that may impact obesity rates in her community. In doing so, she can identify more powerful leverage points outside of the program that have the potential to facilitate and support changes in obesity. Leverage points are places within the system that can be tweaked in a way that supports greater impact. For example, are there actions Suzanne and her team might take that could increase the community's access to opportunities for physical activity? While some leverage points are within Suzanne's capacity to change, others will be beyond her control. However, it will still be useful to be aware of these as she plans for the program. Adopting a systems view won't change the boundaries of this program, but it will expand the boundaries of the evaluation. By recognizing the importance of the different perspectives and values of those outside the program and the interrelationships throughout the system, Suzanne can ensure that the evaluation is framed in a way that captures the key boundaries, diverse perspectives, and interrelationships that serve as important leverage points in the system. Of course, Suzanne's budget won't permit an evaluation of the entire system, but she can ensure that any evaluation she commissions will provide her with more strategic direction on how to effectively address obesity within her community. For example, in addition to recommendations for improving the program, the results of the evaluation might indicate opportunities for new partnerships or external policy change. if her community has poor walking and cycling infrastructure, where might she and her team advocate? Or who could they collaborate with to make changes? By asking these questions, Suzanne is finding that using a systems approach helps her focus on the broader issue of obesity in her community instead of a single program in her organization. She gains a better understanding of what external factors are influencing the program's success and can set more reasonable expectations of what it can accomplish. She's also learning what needs to change both within and outside of the program to better maximize her organization's effectiveness. Many now believe that a systems approach holds the most promise for addressing complex health problems like obesity, which is not only good for Suzanne, but good for everyone.